We're going to have one or two lightning talks. We're going to have a special announcement, an unveiling of the new NYC Tomster, which I'm excited to show you all. And then we've got a talk from our friend Alex Matchneer, which he billed on Twitter today as the best talk that he will ever give in his life. So that's pretty cool. I've got a couple of announcements to make. Before I do that, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors. First off, I want to, and first and foremost, I want to say thank you to Pivotal Labs, which is where we are tonight. Pivotal has been an amazing supporter of Ember NYC, pushing almost 4 years now, I believe. For those of you who are not familiar with Pivotal Labs, Pivotal is a consultancy and also works on a product called Cloud Foundry, which is an open source kind of platform as a service system. If you are somebody who would like to get experience working in an agile environment, you should talk to me, and I'll hook you up with the right folks at Pivotal about talking to them about openings, because they are some of the best in terms of like really learning agile practice as well. I also want to say thank you to a couple of our event sponsors and hosts, specifically Movable Inc., Mommy Nearest, Jorge's company. Jorge, you can wave. Is hosting an upcoming event I'm going to tell you about in a few minutes. And Simple Reach is also not only a great host of some of our project nights, but is also sponsoring a big batch of stickers of the new Tomster that I'm going to show you later. So I'm very excited about that. So those will be available next month. I'll save that news for later. Cool. So that's thank you to our sponsors. We couldn't do it. Oh, I also should mention, speaking of Simple Reach, hello. I also should mention our company, Yap, also makes this possible, mostly by virtue of my time getting stuff set up during the day when I'm supposed to be writing code. So Yap, for those of you who are not familiar, it's a platform for non-technical folks to create mobile apps mostly for events. So conventions, conferences, etc. No tech or design skills necessary. Ember helps you do it. So with that, I want to jump into some announcements. I've got a few, and then I'm going to open up the floor to announcements from you guys. So if you have something that you'd like to share, an event that you're organizing that people might be interested in, if you're hiring and would like to let people know, if you're looking for work as an Ember developer and you want to let people know, that'll be your time to step right up and grab a mic and make a quick announcement. So you can be thinking about that. This is us tonight, our February meetup, Alex Matchneer on ember-concurrency. Our next meetup is going to be March 24th. How do I know that already? Because we're always the fourth Thursday of the month. So you can put it in your calendar. We've been pretty steady, and Pivotal's keeps the date on reserve for us, which is awesome. In addition to these nights of talks, we also have about once or twice a month a night that we call project nights. And we've started a new format for them that we're gonna push on for a little bit. The new format last month was kind of a live coding workshop that our friend Taras Minkowski, who's Ember Sherpa on Twitter, did. And it worked really well. I think we got a lot of great feedback from the people that were there. Opportunity for a lot of good back and forth. And so we're gonna do it again on Wednesday, March 9th at the Firehouse. I opened up RSVPs. We do cap these events at 30 to kind of keep it to a manageable, intimate number of people, right, where we can have good conversations and look at each other's code and so forth. So if that's something you're interested in, it's on the meetup site, and I'll get the meetup up for the March event soon, probably tonight while I'm sitting here, so you can RSVP for that if you want as well. We're looking for talks for the March meetup, so if you have a topic that you'd like to share, either as a 5 to 10 minute lightning talk or as a full-length talk, talk to me or ping me on Twitter or email, or through the meetup. So this is the live coding workshop I mentioned already. There's a new podcast on the scene I'll first mention a couple of great podcasts in the Ember ecosystem if you're not familiar with them. Emberland, which Robert Jackson figures prominently in as a core team member, and Ember Weekend, which is Jonathan Jackson and Chase McCarthy, which has kind of evolved from originally kind of talking about their Weekend Ember project to really being a great source of news of what's going on in the Ember ecosystem. Those are really good. There's also a newish podcast called the Modern Web Podcast, which is here and I believe is in iTunes now, so you should be able to search for it with your favorite podcast client. Our friend and Ember NYC Matthew Beal was interviewed not too long ago on Mobile Doc, Tori, and the future of Ember. This was a great episode, really good, really good thoughts from Matt shared here. And I recently did an interview for this podcast that'll be coming out in the next week or two, talking about Ember CLI deploy and what's been, how that project has evolved. Cool. The other big news that just, I think, came out this morning, is that right, this morning, Alex? Yesterday? Very recently, was the blog post about Ember's first LTS release. And LTS stands for long-term support. So if you've been involved with the Ember ecosystem for a little while, you probably know that there's a 6-week release train. So it seems like pretty much every time you lift your head up from your project, there's a new Ember release, which is both awesome and can be sometimes a little overwhelming. The LTS approach is meant to help teams deal with that. And what it means is that basically every 4 minor releases of Ember, there's going to be a LTS release, which will get bug fixes, security patches, et cetera, for a longer period of time, and there'll be a clean upgrade path that will be, kind of tested and carefully considered by the core team moving from LTS release to LTS release. I thought there was a question back there, but it's just a hi to Hugh. Cool. So that blog post is definitely worth a read. There's a new builds page kind of describing these different release channels that just went live today as well. EmberConf 2016 happening at the end of March. I know I'm getting pretty excited about this. I'll be going with a bunch of other folks from New York. There are still tickets available, and 83% sold out. I was talking to Will. He may or may not have an extra ticket available if you want to chat with him as well. And then the last thing, I think I lost one. We lost a tab. I just want to mention Ember Fest, which is the European Ember conference that took a hiatus last year, is coming back this year, aiming for a mid-October-ish timeframe. So if you're planning out your conference calendar, that might be something you want to think about. I think they're going to be in London or the vicinity this year. And then Lee suggested I mention the Empire City Elixir Conference, which is being organized by some great folks and is happening here in New York City, May 21st. We recently had a talk about Elixir and Ember from Brian Cardarella here at the meetup. If you missed that event, it's up on our YouTube channel along with all of our talks from the past many years. So that's worth a look, and this conference should be pretty cool as well. So with that, I want to open up the floor to announcements from you guys. If you have something you want to share, just hop up and I'll hand you a mic.
I just have a quick question.
Sure, go ahead.
Next month's meetup is going to be the 31st?
The 24th. Yeah, so it'll be just before EmberConf. And I'll mention that if you or somebody you know is doing a talk at EmberConf and you want to give it a run in a real environment, Lee and I would consider not live streaming that talk and holding the video until after EmberConf, if that's something that you're interested in doing. So something to consider. Any announcements? Things people want to share? Cool. Okay. With that, then I'm going to invite our first speaker up. Phil Gengler's been working with Ember for quite a while and been a fixture at the meetup for years now, and I'm excited to see what he's got to share tonight. Would you prefer prefer this handheld or the over the ear? Okay, cool. Testing, testing. All right.
This goes over
Yep,
like
just
that.
like that. Good. Good. You can stick that in your pocket and just give us a hello. Check the levels.
Hello? How's that?
Try just adjust that and just point it right into your mouth.
Point it. Let's try it down here. How's that? That better? Everybody can hear me?
All right. Take it away.
All right, hi everybody. My name, as Luke said, is Phil Gengler. I've been doing Ember for a few years now. I'm one of the people behind Ember Observer. If the name Gengler sounds familiar, you probably know my wife Katie more than you know me. This is the first time I've given a talk, so you haven't seen me much, I imagine. I am here tonight to talk to you about putting composability to work, particularly as it relates to your Ember app. So before we can talk about how we put it to work, we need to know what composability is. So of course the question, what is composability? Composability is combining or composing small reusable bits of code together to make bigger things that have common behaviors, or putting small things together to make a bigger thing is the simple way. So how can we use composition in Ember? And there are a few ways you do this. First one is with mixins. Is there anyone there who doesn't know what a mixin is in Ember? And if you don't be shy, because that's how we learn things. But it seems like everybody knows what a mixin is, so I don't need to explain that. But we can use mixins to define behaviors in one place that we can then incorporate in components or routes all over the place so that we don't need to keep copying and pasting or rewriting code all over and over again. Another way is by template helpers, so stuff like action and mute, hash and component for doing that. We'll see some examples of how we do stuff like that later on. There are a bunch of add-ons that have composable features that were built with composability in mind. Ember Truth Helpers has, if you're not familiar with it, like and, or, equal, stuff like that, but it may not be meant to be combined, but it's something that you can do. You can put them together to make more complex behaviors or more complex expressions in your template. Ember Composable Helpers, I think, is fairly new from Dockyard. It takes a bunch of what seems to me mostly like stuff like array methods, so .filter, sorting, and makes those available as template helpers that you can compose and put together. So instead of having to make a computer property for it all in your controller, you can just do that part right in your template and get that effect. Ember CPM, computer property macros, there are a few of those that are composable. There's Ember Composability, which gives stuff like a parent-child relationship where the parent is aware of the children and vice versa. And there are others out there that offer features like that as well. This is my favorite sort of could have been about composability in Ember, is that back in 2013, there was a pull request that got merged into master to add composable computed properties. So if you've ever done where you want to filter an array, I don't know what happened here.
Try, what do you think, unplugging, replugging?
Technical difficulties. All right.
And we're sort of back.
Yes, where did my
See the
browser go?
presentation. Is it on another screen maybe, like another space? No.
No, I don't know where it went. Let's try.
Gather windows maybe?
Yeah.
That's just those two. How about the window menu of Chrome? There you go.
All right, I don't know what happened there, but anyway, we're back. So there was the, again, composable computer properties. So if you have an array that you want sorted, but you want it filtered first, you could just combine them and just create a single computer property that was the filtered sorted array without having to create the intermediate property first. This was merged behind a feature flag for about 2 months before it was pulled out. This is something I would love to see come back as an add-on or as part of Ember. If anybody's interested, I think this would be really wonderful for making stuff a lot cleaner in our computer properties. So now that we know a bit about what composition is, why would we want to use it in our Ember app? What does it get us? What are the benefits of it? For one thing, it's a lot easier to tell what a thing does when it only does one thing. So we can easily see that this is doing this small bit of behavior. We can figure out all the ways it gets from A to B, input to output, and we can easily tell what it's doing, how it gets there, and we know there should be no unexpected surprises. Composable units that we write tend to be smaller. They're isolated and they're more testable. And just like they are, like we can reason about them because there's less going on. We can test them more easily because there's less going on. We can do a very comprehensive test of a small thing and know that we've gotten all the cases versus a more complicated bit of unit. And the thing is that since we have this behavior that we can write once and use in all sorts of different places, we have less repetition. We get the DRY, don't repeat yourself principle applied. It makes maintainability a lot easier because we have a certain behavior that's defined in just one spot. It's not copied and slightly different in 5 different components or 5 different routes. So how can we put composition to work in our Ember apps? So here's an example that's a little contrived, but it gives you an idea of how you would do something if you wanted to have, say, 3 different behaviors for routes. You have, say, one that's routes that only allow authenticated users, one that is routes that have like a before unload prompt to confirm that you want to leave the page, and one that does something else that's super awesome. It could be a boring thing too. It doesn't have to be awesome, but we'll suppose it is because it's more interesting that way. Now, if you wanted to have routes that combined some of these features, if you're doing this the naive way with like single inheritance, extending everything from route, you'd have to create a file and a route that extended every possible combination. You would have 3, one for each of your behaviors, and then 4 others for all the combinations, everything with everything else. And I don't know if you can read the code or not, but it is something that you end up repeating the code all over the place because it's not just in one spot. It's in 3 different spots. And if you want to change it, you have to go everywhere and do that. And just imagine if you had a 4th behavior you wanted to add to a route, and not to every route, but to some of them, you'd have to create even more combinations. And if you had a 5th, you would have even more, and it would just balloon to a massive thing. And it just become a mess in almost no time. So here's the same thing doing it with mixins. And you notice the base behaviors, the mixins look almost exactly the same. Just instead of extending ember.route, we do ember.mixin.create. But then when we create an actual route, we bring in the mixins and we just include them. We get those behaviors and we don't have to worry about combining or creating every combination. And we don't have to worry about this being defined in multiple places. It's only in that one mixin. So another example is using the mute helper with action. In this case, what we see is that we have, say, an attendance counter. You want to count 2 different lines. You have left counter, right counter, and a button that just increments that value. And since we're doing this data down, actions up, we don't just change value in that button component. We pass it back up as an action. But rather than create the action on our attendance counter component, we call this, we do action, mute, and the counter name. And that's smart enough to know just to update that value. We don't have to worry about writing an action. We don't have to define an update left counter, update right counter action, or an action that takes the counter name as a parameter and updates that way. We can compose that and we can just eliminate some redundancy that way. This is an example. This came from the Ember 2.3 release announcement. It shows the hash helper and the component helper. And while this particular example does not actually show you really composability in action, you can imagine with the close button, you can imagine specifying other buttons that use different components. So you can combine and compose different components through that way and use that different ways throughout your app. Like a save button, a cancel button instead of a close button, and so on. There are, of course, as with anything, things to watch out for, perils and pitfalls, as I put it. So here's an example. I have two mixins that are used by a component. They each define value, and they each define a did insert element hook. Now, in the did insert elements, they each log their name and a value. So who out there would take a guess at what we'll see if we ran this? What would the output in the console be? Any guesses?
ABC. Thing to ABC.
Just that. Anybody else want to take a stab at it? Everybody agrees. I guess you're all very smart. You're all very aware of this. But yeah, it is going to say just thing to ABC. You won't see anything about thing 1, not even printing out thing 2's value. And there are two things to watch out for here. And I like this example because it shows two different tricks. One is that any properties that you include in a mixin may get clobbered by something further down the line if you're not careful. So if you have a mixin that has state, you'd be really careful about making sure that nothing else down the line is going to create a property or a function or anything else with that name, because then your thing won't be there. It might get modified in a way you don't expect. And the other thing is that if you do put on like a lifecycle hook like did insert element here, you need to be very careful to call this dot underscore super at the top so that other things further down get called and just stop with you. And just the key takeaway of that is when it comes to mixins, the order that you include them in your component or router object matters. And the last one that defines a thing will be the one that wins, whether that's the last mixin, the component, or in the case of some of the values, anything passed into that component. So here's another example. This just uses a couple of things from Ember truth helpers versus, let's say, a computer property with a name. And I like to say that just readability is a lot easier when you have something that has a simple name, it's not doing the logic. And this example it's a very simple example. So you have something, an admin can enter the page, or the user who created it. The user is the owner. But it's a lot more obvious that the user can edit the page when it's a property called that versus watch it there. You can read it, you can figure it out, and you'll know what it's doing, but you may not know why, and it's harder to change. And if you end up repeating that logic over and over again, you've just ended up not making less repetition, you've made it worse. And you may think that this isn't so bad. This is a small example. I know what I was doing. It's pretty obvious, but what's going to happen when somebody else comes with that code and looks at it, and they don't know what you were thinking when you wrote it? They don't know what your intention was. What happens when you come back to it a year later and you've forgotten what you were doing here? I find that naming things well as computer properties is a lot cleaner and a lot more maintainable than having a long chain of nested template helper calls that may not make the most sense. So it's tempting to start putting more logic in your templates. It's something that there's a lot more add-ons doing that, new versions of Ember are adding more of these template helpers. So it seems like, oh, I can add more logic there. Don't do it. As we saw, it's just a lot more readable having the name there. The way we do our code in JavaScript, we can do a little bit more cleanly for a lot of things than all the nested template helper calls. Not everything that we can do in a computer property in JavaScript can we do in that template helper. We can't call functions for, say, filtering an array. So at some point, we're going to end up pulling some of that logic back out. It just makes more sense to have it there, all there in one place in the JavaScript in the first place, in my opinion. So like I say, templates are high-level language, not a language like JavaScript, but just in the manner of speaking. And they keep them expressive. Just an analogy here, I think there's a lot of things you can do that are very low level, and you don't want to leak those into the high level thing. If somebody asks you what you made for dinner last night, you're going to tell them that you made, say, a roast chicken with potatoes. You're not going to tell them all the ingredients and how you put it together. When you start leaking that in there, if you're like that example we saw with the template helper is the and and the or. That's a low level thing. That's the ingredients. That's the recipe you followed. That's not what you did. That's how you did it, and we want to hide that as lower level, keep that abstracted away. I know that's not the most popular opinion. I think there's a lot of, Ember Composability is all about putting more of that in the template, so it may not be the most popular opinion, but that's what I think. So that's all I have. If you don't hate me from this, and you are looking for an Ember developer, I am available for hire if I haven't just burned all my bridges. So.
Questions for Phil?
So your first example involved mix-ins on routes, and I wonder if you've seen like authenticated routes created using a route with path of slash that was then used with other routes as subroutes, composing that way.
I don't think I've seen that. You're talking about just creating in the router or in the routes themselves? Because I mean, you could do. Sorry.
So this dot route authenticated, comma, open squiggly bracket, path, colon, slash, close squiggly bracket, function, open bracket, and then inside this dot route, my first route, this dot route, my second route, and all the first route and the second route can in a way inherit all the features of your authenticated route without the URL changing.
Right, and that's one way, and that's a way of getting that behavior. I don't know if I would say that's composing the behavior that way, but it is a way of getting that same effect without doing the mixins.
Other questions?
Hi, Phil.
Hi.
So I have a question. I was doing some React stuff recently, and I was looking for mix-ins in React. And React made the executive decision to not use mix-ins, to actually, they like had the ability to do it, and then they were like, we're actually choosing to not support mix-ins because we think it's some type of anti-pattern or something. And I think that they're, like reading between the lines, their reasoning was that if it's not like a pure function, then don't use it. Like strict functional stuff, and it comes from like composability world, obviously. Do you get why they think that's a bad idea? Because honestly, I think mixins is a great idea, because like if you rely on an array being present on an object and you rely on a thing that manipulates that array, that's like a bundled behavior that you can compose. So I just don't understand the choice to like for React to not support mixins.
Yeah, I was actually reading a thing about that, and it was more like, the one I read was someone saying, hey, we took this out, and here's how to get basically that same behavior back. So there are people out there in React who want that back. I'm not sure why they did it. I'm not sure what they think the benefit is. But you see it a lot in Ember, a lot of mixins. A lot of add-ons that provide behavior provide mixins. Ember Simple Auth gives you an authenticated route mixin. It doesn't give you an object that you extend from, so you can mix it into your own routes as you need to. I think it's great. I'm glad Ember has it, and I hope it doesn't go away.
Other questions out there? I have one. Can you go back to the slide where you were comparing the CP to the truth helpers?
Oops. This one, right?
Yeah. So I've run into a couple of situations recently where I really wanted to do this, but I was in a place in my template where I didn't already have a context where I could put this CP. So for example, like I'm in a pound each loop, right? Where inside of it, there is no place that's a this, right? That's
right.
A new this to put this. So I was thinking about that when you were showing this slide, and I was thinking about one alternative to these two, or a third alternative, which is a helper, which is like user can edit space user space page. So you make a helper that kind of encapsulates this logic in a readable way, in a way that's as readable as this is, but it has the benefit of being usable in this place where like there's no place to really stick your CP without inventing a new component.
Right. Yeah, I like that idea. That's for places again where you can't put just that computer property, but you get all the benefits, which is that you have the single, well-defined, very clear name, and you can hide the logic where it's not in your template, and it may be a little more readable in JavaScript. So that's a great idea. If you're not able to do a computer property or write on something, that's great. I think that people should definitely look into that.
Cool. All right. Any others? Okay, let's give a round of applause to Phil. Thank you. Dan, you can come plug in. Cool. Do you want the over the I don't know, which ones do you guys think is louder? This one or this one? Whoa.
Which one do I hit?
Oh, you're going to plug in this to your mini DVI, and then if you need power, you can plug that in. Try that one. Is it you have any ideas for us, Lee? Okay. Oh. Nope. Or you can put that on while you're waiting. Okay, good.
It's a second. Is that all right? Did I do that? This way?
Other side. Other way.
Like so. That way.
They just put that hook right over the top.
Okay. La 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 la. Whoa. Yeah. Okay.
You can stick that in your pocket in case you move around.
Okay. And then
And
4.
good on that side. This
Yeah.
side, do we need to turn this back on? I'm just waiting for someone to invent a JavaScript framework for keeping your projector working properly. Flux.
What's wrong?
I'm waiting for this projector to
Oh, that one. What?
project.
But it's not even showing up there. So.
Well, you have something on screen here.
Do I?
This is your
Uh,
screen. So right now, do you want to mirror it? Like you can do that,
Oh, that.
or you
Yeah.
can turn on
Perfect.
mirroring.
Perfect.
Wanna
Yeah.
do
Back
this?
back to that. And then I keep perfect. All right.
Cool.
Okay.
Any ideas about this?
I can't see.
Oh, that might do it. I have 2 green lights for the first time.
All right.
I know. All right, this is warming up.
La la la.
Let me introduce our speaker.
Wow.
If you are interested in factories in Ember data, you might want to get to know this guy. If you're interested in international tango, you might want to get to know this guy.
It's true.
Um,
It's true.
and generally, if you're interested in in thinking about testing in Ember, about scenario building, you're going to want to pay attention to this talk. Ladies and gentlemen, Dan
That's
Sudol.
awesome. Hey, thank you. So, has anybody ever heard anybody talk or even thought about building scenarios and tests? You have? Oh, okay. Really? Oh, okay. I never actually heard anybody talk about it, and I stumbled upon it myself because of the data set in my application, which I'll show you later. And now that's all I think about. So at the end of this talk, you'll either find this really useful, kind of useful, a little bit useful, or not that useful. Covered them all. Okay. Hopefully you find it at least interesting, because I want to give you, I'm betting that you'll get one little light bulb about something you could do differently the way you're testing. And Luke mentioned Factory Guy with factories. There's going to be some of that in here, because it helps to make the scenarios easier to create. So let's take a look. So scenario building doesn't really need an add-on. I'm using Factory Guy, like I said, for the factories. Don't need it. You can just use, in terms of Ember data, you can do other things. Maybe I'll get to that. The code I show is just my build, what I've done, the way I've done my scenario. And the goal is to have you just think about the data that you have and see if the scenario builder makes sense. Usually it does. So. Okay, so the page object is a kind of a popular thing now, the Ember CLI page object, where you say, hey, what's it used for? It's extracting or abstracting the interaction on the page with page. And the scenario class is to abstract or extract interaction with the data. It's totally changed everything the way I test. So let's get right into it. This is an example of kind of data that you might see in my application. There's a yeah, okay, that's what I want to do. Darn, I don't know how to go back off of this. How do I? It's going to be tricky, oh well. Let me try it anyway.
You keep talking and I'll
Oh, there it is. Well, I don't know if I do this, then I have to get back. Oh well, I'll just forget showing you that slide. Okay, so this is the kind of data that is in my application. There's a project and there's a tree of these entries, and there's groups and these elements here that you can make this sort of tree of project stuff, and there's zillions of combinations you can do here, but the scenario builder, the concept I'm using is just to use a few sets of elements, like 10 of these, couple groups, and then I can make all my combinations and do my tests. Show you. So that's the project. Those are the groups. Those are the elements. Those are called entries, and I've got to kind of set this up so you understand what's coming next. And the whole hierarchy is called a program, this thing here. Usually this is actually a child of this, so this would be indented, but in this case it's not. And so what it looks like in terms of a data model is project has many groups, like department and spaces, and those will be relevant later at the factories. And groups have elements, like sales, market, room, use those, and then those have entries. And those can have entries. And then elements, so the key thing is a lot of this element is the common denominator, and everything needs these elements. So in my scenario setup, I kind of focus on elements and how to sort of focus around that. And there's a lot, you see, if you want an element, you've got a little bit of boilerplate here. If you want an entry, it's like a lot of boilerplate just to get yourself an entry. And they all need to be attached to the project, all those entries. So, yeah, it's a lot of arrows, whatever, but it's kind of it's not even that much. A lot of other data stuff is more nested than this. But as long as you got to belong to and has many, you've got a tree. Boom. So, and usually in a tree, there's stuff that you care a lot about, usually in the leaves. And the middle stuff, it's like, yeah, just throw something in there. I don't care. As long as it's attached, my scenario works, I'm good. And that's the premise of this. So the problem I had was so much boilerplate, so much boilerplate. Here's a test. This is like, I've got to make a group, and then I've got to make some elements. They're the child. Then I've got to make add the groups to the project. Then I've got to make the entries. Then I've got to make the blocking area. Then I've got to expect something. I'm not even sure what I'm trying to do anymore. What I really cared about was just sales that was in the blocking area. Then I make some other entry, and I expect. So same test using a scenario. It's like a breath of fresh air. It's like that. I couldn't really understand that well, even though I wrote it. Here, it's like, oh, let's make a scenario. Let's create some data. So let's create a program. All right. So I just this is my DSL. It's like, hey, give me a sale with some area and head count. Give me a market. And what I'm doing is I'm setting it up just as the tree, like project. Here's the first one in the level. So I've set this up so I could perfectly see where the levels are and where the tree structure is and what element is in each entry. And there you go. Thank you. Hey, let me add a blocking area to that and give me a sale element. The key thing is the element. And let me do an expectation that the average density is whatever. Done. So, hey, let me add another entry. And this is you'll see, I'll explain this later. This sort of sets up the hierarchy. So it's saying, hey, go into this level here and put one of these. So this will actually be at this level. Sale, boom. So put market as a child of sale. Not to, whatever. It's my DSL thing, who cares? So you'll have your own DSL. That's the goal, is to have you think, how can I set my scenario builder? Or how about this one? For just ridiculous, boilerplate, 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 boilerplate. Haven't done anything yet. Haven't done anything. Let's keep going. Boilerplate, so the test, now we're starting the test. All right, that was the before case of just setting up the program tree. So, hey, yeah, blah, 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 blah. I wrote this. I don't know what's going on. I stare at it, and then I figure it out, and I forget. I don't know. I have no idea what it's doing, really. And I'm not being facetious, like I really don't. I've forgotten what the program is, what the data looked like. Luckily, my data is sort of visual, you could see a nice little tree and has little pretty colors. In this case, not every program, not every data set. So if I showed you, I was going to show you my site where the data is laid out, and you'll see later where it's visual. Those bubbles look pretty crappy. Oh well. So the same test using a scenario. Of course, you can't compare because you don't really know what it did, was this. This is what it was doing. It was like, hey, make me an entry, a market, and I use this, like, position that below market off to the right means, like, hey, it's a child of market, sale is a child of office is a child of sale, so you've got the tree structure, bam, no problem. Com is a child of sale, because it's at third level. So this is set it up, and then to get back those entries, I go, hey, scenario, give me that market entry. Easy. So I'm interacting, I'm pushing data, pulling it out, and hey, get me that sale element that's a child of market. Hey, get me the office that's a child of sale, that's a child of market, et cetera, et cetera. So the test is like, hey, what's the tree position? The tree position is like, whatever. You get the idea. Do you want me to explain? No, okay. Tree position. So that's my test. Bam, bam, bam. Really easy. And it could have been even easier. So all I had to do was just add scenarios this way, because I've got two ways to add. Create a program like with an array of arrays, or I can just go bam, 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 create those. And basically every entry has a position based on who's your tree parents, like 1, then your 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2. So that's what I'm trying to check to make sure that, because it's super important that they stay ordered when you move them up and down because they're sortable. So there we go. Boom. That was it. That was it. Boilerplate gone. Never have to create a thing again. Never have to look at, even the factors. I'm not looking at them. It's like all stuff back in the scenario builder. So just that right there is like, oh my God, I just ripped all that crap out of my test and put this in. Scenario builder everywhere. Never looked at another whatever the hell I was doing before. So there's different ways to set up, extract data from the scenario. So like as I showed you, I've got my create program thing where I set up my array of arrays, and that looks like this. Like I was saying, it's visual. Luckily, when people, when I go and hit refresh on the whatever development, it's like there it is. And to extract, it's just give me the entry at sale. It's 2 levels. So we saw the 2 levels. Visually, it looks like this. Sale has a child called market. Market is a child of sale. You set up options if you want, and then you can extract either one by saying entry sale, blah, 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 that way. 3 levels, same idea, as we saw. That's what it visually looks like, and that's how you extract the data from scenario. Okay, so how did I create this scenario builder? Ooh, what did I do? It's my little hocus pocus, and you'll have your own hocus pocus, I reckon. So let me show you what I did. Constructor, so the project, every scenario has to have a project. So that was the only thing that was built, like, when I create a scenario build, when I make a new scenario build, it's like, boom, make a project. Everything else makes nothing. So it sets itself, the project in the scenario, that's it. So you start out with just a project. It's like the parent node. And then let's say you want to find a group, like, hey, scenario, give me a group. pass it a group name, department. I've got a couple of group names that are always set in the factories. You'll see that in a second. So it's like I've used, my palette is like, I have 3 groups I always use. I've got 10 elements, that's it. But like I say, I can make hundreds of combinations at will. So when I want a group, I pass in the group name, hey, do I have those groups? Let's check. I guess not. Let me make it. I pass in some options. I need the project in that group. I need the position. And then I use factory guy here to make the group. Like I said, you could use store, create record, whatever, but in this case, the factories give me some benefits. And I pass it back. So, yeah. And that position could have been set up in the factory. I'll show that in a second. So what does the group factory look like? Oh, right, better. Just get rid of that position. Could have just done that. Factory guy function, right? So let's take a look at those, the group factory. So uses factory guy. Hey, all those models are polymorphic, by the way. So factory guy is nice because I can sort of set the different types. Like in this case, set up a sequence for the position number, and this organizational group, that's the type of, its type is organizational group, duh. And I use the position, da-da-da. Departments is my name type. So the key thing is here, there's a name type. So when I ask for this exact word, factory guy knows like, oh, it's part of this, the model type is organizational group. Boom, sets the position, the type, boom, boom, I get it. It's done. So this kind of little besides helps to ease the boilerplate in the scenario builder. If you don't have this, like, et cetera, et cetera. So, So what about elements? How does that work in the scenario class? How do I get elements? I'm using a thing called a name map. This is just a hash. It's like hash. Hey, if you want a sales element, it's in the group departments. So it's sort of like the name, the group. So it knows like, oh yeah, you want the sale, like let me find that group, name department, stuff it in there. So that's a little bit of, this is my glue that holds the elements. So all it does, like, hey, find the group name. Do I have that group? If not, make the element, add that group to it. That group is already attached to the project, boom, 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 tree's set up. So that's sort of a key. That's my special sauce, is that name map for this. This is the data I have. So the element factories. So how do they look? There's the name type sale. And, oh, okay, cool. And market, it's got a color, the green color, so I set the colors, the abbreviation, the name, da-da-da-da. Not much stuff, but it's just sort of, boom, that gets my, in terms of Ember data land, it's like sets up a model with that type, with those properties done. And so once again, these are name types. In factory, you can set up the names, da-da-da. So the entries, what do they look like? How do you create the program, create an entry, blah, blah, blah. How do you do that? Basically, just like whatever. I create a thing, blah, 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 blah. All right, wait, let me go back to it. It's just like, this is my like hocus pocus of how to create those entries in the program. Your hocus pocus will be different. So the key is it's using factories, a lazy setup. Nothing's happening until you push it into the scenario, and it's easy to set up, easy to extract. Like I say, working with a limited set of elements, with my map here, around 10, 34 groups. It's like a palette, artist palette, and you can make tons of combinations. See, I like this. Oh yeah, this is a nice test where I set up the scenario. Before each, make a scenario, tree parent, create the program, expect something else. It's like never, once again, never touching anything except the scenario builder. Create, extract, expect. Easy. This is another part of this thing. It's a visual kind of system, so there's this blocking thing where you can make these blocks and drag them around, and this they're all relative to this 0, 0 position, and that's a block. These are all 5, 10, 15, 20. So I was like, oh my, I used to just trying to make fake data for this, like crazy. All SVG elements. So it's now I just came up with this. My special sauce is I go, hey, make a sale element, boom, start path, and then a 25 by 20 element, boom, and then I can test against it, like, is your area this, or are you this, and blah, 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 whatever the stuff I'm doing. Is it the density, blah, 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 blah. So, can't read what that says. These aren't, they get converted to SVG paths, so the scenario builder kind of converts those into the 25 by 20 into an array of arrays of basically points, XY points. What's it work for you? Maru? I just started a new project where somebody had there's this project with there was users, dealers, cars, whatever, this like new things. And first thing I thought was like, I'm not touching this data. I'm using a scenario builder. So I said, what if I could do this? Something like, set up a scenario with like a dealer A with 3 vehicles, like I don't care, or maybe dealer B with like name types, since I can do name types. Give me a car, van, SUV. And there you go, there's my scenario. You know, and then I could test against that. So it's like, I just started thinking, I don't want to get my hands dirty anymore. Don't want to do it. Just want to make a scenario. And I'm not going to show that slide, this one here, because it's like, when I say, I was going to show it because, I didn't want to show it because like, do I really, that's like a strong, I pity the fool that doesn't have like a factory or scenario builder, but it's like, I don't know, do I really pity it that, it's more like, I kind of pity the fool. So it's not that strong. It's a moderate pity the fool. There wasn't a moderate pity the fool. It was just a very strong demonstrative pity the fool. It's not that pitiful. You're not that pitiful. You know, he's like, not that bad. So turns out I never, even thought about this, but I thought about this, but there's actually formal patterns for this stuff. And they don't really, it's not quite the same test data builder pattern, and there's this object mother pattern. It's kind of a weird name. They kind of, it's similar, but mine is sort of more freestyle, I suppose. Wrap up, scenario benefits. Heaps of benefits. There's common interface, and this is cool. Sometimes you think, oh, Dan, this look cute, your demo's good, hey, pretty colors, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, think about it for a second. If you had a scenario build like that, there's one way now when I want to make data, it's like done. I don't have to worry like I used to screw it up all the time. Oh, I forgot to add the project. Oh, I forgot to add the group name with the correct names. Like, so much ridiculosity. So common interface for using and making the data is much less boilerplate to maintain, much less prone to error, much more concise, obviously, saw that. And this is a good one too. Newbies to the project start making data and tests, like bam, bam, bam. Hey, how to make a program, boom. It's not like, oh, it's like, boom, scenario builder tells you what to do, done. Make tests is funner, so you want to write more tests. Still see a lot of projects where people aren't so motivated to write tests because it's like, it's so hard to write the data, get the data set up. So, and that is a wraps. Any questions? Yep.
So I really have more like comments than questions.
Yeah.
One is, you kept using the word scenario,
Yeah.
but sometimes you it was referring to the actual scenario, and other times to the scenario builder class.
Yeah, I think of it as the same thing, because when I run a test, I create a scenario, which is basically the class scenario builder, whatever, and then that's what my test data is in there. That's it. So when I say, it's a good way to, it's actually a good, everything like, with word is for same thing, same kind of thing. So a scenario builder is like, for me, I think of it as my scenario in the test, my data that's being set up. Is that kind of?
So I think that it was a little harder to follow because you didn't make that distinction.
Oh, I see. Good point. Because I've sort of thought of them the same now. So, okay.
Okay, and the second comment I had to make was, most of us are using ES6 or JavaScript plain. Very few of us are using CoffeeScript. Putting the slides in CoffeeScript, again, made it harder for some of us to follow.
Yeah, I actually left it in CoffeeScript and didn't convert it because it's kind of easier I thought it was easier because there's just not a lot of stuff. It's like,
and I'm sure for anyone using CoffeeScript for years, it is easier.
yeah. Well, I mean, in a sense, it's like, oh, it is just a line of like stuff. There wasn't much. I was trying to just show like me, group, meh. So I don't think it was ridiculous to use CoffeeScript.
No,
that's why I kept it. But
it
I hear
wasn't
your
ridiculous.
point.
It wasn't ridiculous at all.
Yeah.
I think it was just a little harder to follow.
Harder to follow because you're used to I understand. I thought about that.
And the last thing was, similar vein, most of us use QUnit because it comes with Ember CLI.
Yeah.
And you use Mocha, and that also looked different to our eyes.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe it opened up.
Yeah.
I love Mocha.
I actually think Mocha's better.
Yeah.
Personally.
Yeah, I like Mocha better, but yeah.
But it's one more thing that's harder to follow.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
Just, for future presentations.
Yeah, future version. Yeah. Fair enough.
All right. Any questions for Dan? All right, Dan, thanks so much.
Hey, you're welcome.
All right, we're going to have a little unveiling, and we're going to take a break, and we're going to be back with Alex. Anybody ever been to ember-js.com? Yeah? So if you've been to ember-js.com anytime in the last 4 years, you've seen these three images on the front page. You got your handlebars, mustaches, right? Referencing the templating language. You've got your Eiffel Tower, referencing anybody? Architecture? Right? I think that's what I always assumed anyway. And then you have this thing, hamster with glasses, Tomster, whose original intent was to make Ember feel warm and fuzzy, feel welcoming. And I think it worked. I've actually talked to, I've obviously as part of doing this meetup, I've talked to a lot of people who have adopted Ember, made the decision to do that. And of a lot of them, larger number than you'd think, when I said, so, why did you choose Ember? They said, you know what? The website is awesome. And I was like, okay, that's, hey, that's a reason. So Tomster. This was the original. We just saw this a little bit of a larger version. He is a friend here, obviously less famous. We never really heard too much about this guy in the wheel, but the Tomster certainly has become famous. And in fact, there became a movement where there were other Tomsters that started to appear. First on the Ember.js site and then other places. And Ember NYC, you might be aware, let's see, has had a Tomster for a while. You may not be aware that this was a semi-unsanctioned Tomster. So every Tomster in every kind of officially sanctioned Tomster in the world is actually designed by the same person. Designed by a very talented designer whose first name is Lindsay. I don't remember her last name, but she's Lindsay.io on Dribble if you want to check her stuff out. And in fact, she says right up here in her Dribble bio, yes, I created Tomster for Ember.js, so she's become well known for it. And so she's gone in the process after the NYC meetup kind of broke the ice and created this unsanctioned Tomster, which was designed by Stefan Penner's wife, Sam, for us. A lot of other meetups have gone ahead and started to commission Tomsters. So these were some of the first Tomsters that appeared on the site and for the original Ember camp. For the, again, documentation pages, EmberConf 2014, the release pages, and then we started to get the meetup Tomsters. Munich, London, Salt Lake City, another EmberConf, also on my shirt. Built with Ember. There's another meetup, Philly, Austin, Houston, Louisville, Jacksonville. Hello, Jacksonville, tuning in live, I understand tonight. Seattle, Dallas, Boston, Montevideo, Pirate, I don't know where that meetup is, Atlanta, Vancouver, Denver, Portland, and finally the most recent one, SoCal, Southern California. Zara, and Matthew Beal, who gave a little preview last month of this Tomster, approached me and said, hey, we'd like to gift a new Tomster to New York City, a Tomster that is officially sanctioned and designed by our friend, the community's friend, Lindsay. And so I said, that sounds awesome. Let's do it. You guys want to see it? Okay. So there she is. I'm pretty sure that she's the first Tomster that identifies female, which I didn't realize actually once, even through the whole final approval process, but I'm pretty proud of that. I think it's pretty awesome. So yeah, Statue of Liberty. We have 3 versions. As you saw, this is the full version with the full background. There is actually, little known fact, if you're a meetup and you're commissioning a Tomster, there's a couple of different levels of Tomsters that you can commission. And it's, you can pay a little bit or you can pay a little bit more. And of course, Matthew and Zara said, we're getting the top notches. We're New York City after all. And so we get the whole background, including the Ember NYC subway stop, where the J and S lines serve. We got the pigeon. We got the fire hydrant providing a base of water for the Statue of Liberty to stand in. Yellow cab. I have gotten some feedback that this should be an Uber now, but some of our favorite cities, favorite skyline items there. So anyway, I don't have stickers of all of these tonight, but I do have at least one sticker for each of you of this middle one, the full Ember NYC. And I'm excited to announce that our friends at Simple Reach, Andre and Nick, you guys wave. And other folks from Simple Reach too, have generously offered to make stickers, a larger group of stickers for us to share around and have at EmberConf and give to the other meetups and that kind of stuff. So they're working on that, and we'll have those for at next month's meetup if all goes well. So I want to, again, just say thank you to Matthew and Zara. We're going to take a little break now while Alex gets set up. So find me and get yourself a Tomster NYC sticker. We're excited and passionate about this topic. So ladies and gentlemen of the Ember.js core team, for his umpteenth time on the Ember NYC stage, please give me a warm welcome for Alex Matchneer.
Thank you. Hey everybody, my name is Alex. I'm presenting on something called ember-concurrency. And I guess this slide makes a little bit of a comeback, but for now I guess you can think of this as the ultimate ember-concurrency. And you'll notice there's also a little bit of a new face popping up every so often. Can anyone see it? Who might that be? Ember NYC Tomster? Pretty sweet. That's how up to date these slides are. So I also want to let maybe these images soak in, because this is kind of how I feel about the state of a lot of solutions for dealing with async in Ember today. If you're writing your apps, time is there, the clocks exist, but they're droopy and they're just weighing everything down, and it's really hard to get right. You end up. This is also one of those uncommissioned, unofficial Tomsters. I can only show this once before if you have to fear some kind of follow-up. So keep those in mind, because they're, it kind of sets the stage for how I feel about Ember and what this stuff is trying to solve. So what is Ember concurrency? First off, it's an Ember add-on. You can use Ember CLI and type in Ember install Ember concurrency and get running right away using this new add-on. And it's the add-on that enables you to write tasks. And I'll explain what those are in a moment, but in summary, they are cancelable, restartable, asynchronous operations. Kind of like promises, but you'll see what's different about them. And they bring something called structured concurrency to your app. So what is structured concurrency? Well, it's actually based on another idea called structured programming, and that's something that's pretty much a 50-year-old idea at this point. And it kind of was the basis of a sort of programming language revolution in the late 60s, kind of spurred on by a paper called Go-To Statement Considered Harmful by Dijkstra. And I know that quoting Dijkstra in a presentation is a little played out, thanks to the React folk, but since React Conf was this week, I figure I might get away with it. So what is unstructured programming? So this is a sort of a comparison. On the left, I'm doing a sort of what's called goofus and gallant for anybody who was bored in the dentist's office reading highlights. So the goofus example on the left is showing you what unstructured programming looks like, assuming that there were a thing called goto in JavaScript. And goto is a programming language construct that's not really in JavaScript, but it's in some older languages like C and Fortran. I know there's a lot of Fortran developers in the audience. I know that's where Ember gets most of its draw. But if you were to write a function that looped through an array of values, and then for each one process them in some way and said, processing this index of a particular element using this goto construct, you might write it like this, where you say, okay, console logs started processing, and you start off I0. I mean, usually this sort of thing would be at the beginning of like a for loop or something. And then this, which is not actually JavaScript, is basically saying a label. This is something that you might come back to later when you see this goto start thing. But if you're using unstructured programming, you might write it like this, which is check the sort of ending condition first, and if I is equal to values.length, the number of arrays in this, the number of elements in this array, then you print done processing and then return. Otherwise, process that particular item and then go to start. And you're literally telling the programming language to take this thing and just go back here. Don't try and box in a while loop or express some similar line of code that happens every iteration. Just go back here. Trust me, it's fine. It's cool. Don't worry about it. So that's unstructured programming, and there's a reason that goto is not in JavaScript, even if there's other kind of programming language warts that do show up in JavaScript. So the gallant structured programming version of this would look like this, and not only is it less code, but it's also has some other benefits. It obviously doesn't use this thing called goto because that doesn't exist, and this is actual legit JavaScript. So this should seem pretty familiar. I'm really not doing anything special here at all, but just make a for loop, set your initialization variables, say what needs to happen for you to continue on in this loop, and say what needs to happen to sort of go to the next element in this loop. And for each one, while I is less than values.length, print out processing index, process it, and then when you're finally done, say done processing. This is really boring stuff. I'm just trying to give you a sort of mental framework for what eventually how Ember concurrency relates to this in async context. I have a little note here saying also, maybe don't use explicit for each loops all the time, but don't use explicit for loops all the time, but use, for each if you know how that sort of stuff works. So structured programming was basically a push to really embrace these logical blocks of code. If you're going to write a for loop, if you're going to write something that iterates many times over something, use a loop. Be very clear about what is the sort of beginning conditions and what needs to be true for you to continue iterating, and then very clearly say, this is the end of the loop. Now, this section of code has nothing to do with iterating. And I think that was sort of the point of what that paper was all about, that sort of spurred a lot of programming languages to really embrace this stuff. So structured programming is all about dictating clear logical boundaries in your code. Loop conditions start like this, keeps iterating like this, and it ends in these conditions. And always be able to understand a basic question of wherever you happen to be paused in your piece of code, always be able to understand, why am I here? How did I get here? So for instance, if we have some little chunk of code over here that says if today is, well, what the current date is today, Thursday, February 25th, 2016, if Luke has introduced me, the room still has people in it because I haven't, talked forever and bored everyone to tears and they just left, which is, it's happened a few times. This is my umpteenth Ember presentation and they don't always go very well. While there are still people in it, keep on talking. And basically, if you were to say pause your JavaScript inspector here and you were here at the keep talking line, you would be able to see like, well, I know I'm here because this must have been true and this must have been true and this must have been true. You can sort of organize your logic in sort of these lifespans, of which this is a child lifespan, this is a child lifespan, this is a child lifespan. It's very easy to think about this stuff, rather than writing something in Go2 where it's just go here. You're gonna lose all sorts of context as to why you're here, but trust me, it's fine. Just go there. So like I said, when you write using structured programming, which is pretty much all the programming you might do, at least when things are synchronous, you can easily visualize the beginning, middle, and end of an operation. So does JavaScript give you structured programming? Yes, totally does. What doesn't these days? But it's really only really meaningful when the code is running synchronously. And by that, I mean there's no timers, there's no AJAX requests, there's nothing that would sort of take you out of the frame of the current context where that code originally started running. So yes, there's structured programming, but it pretty much immediately loses its value, in my opinion, once things are asynchronous. And then callbacks, which are the way of sort of coming back from a timer or an AJAX request, they sort of form like the new go-to, the new thing that everyone just has to sort of put up with, even though you lose a lot of the boundaries. And so when I say you lose a lot of the boundaries, this is a very real example of what I mean. If you have a component in an Ember app and it installs a click handler, you want to say, okay, you want to tell expose to the template that you're saving, and then you can let the user know that, oh, you're saving some model or something. You call .save in the model, and you're using promises because there are other even worse ways to go than using promises. But you say save, and then the promise that's returned from that, just say .then, and then whenever that's supposed to be done, you want this line of code to run. But this is probably going to hit the server. It's going to take a little bit of time. And if the user gets bored and you don't prevent them from navigating away, then by the time that you navigate away, maybe that's when this callback fires. And then you try to say this.set status, the same one here, set it to saved so it shows up, only to find that you end up getting some exception thrown, or if you've got your bug snag set up, you start getting emails about clients calling set on destroyed object. And the root of the problem is basically that while basically from here, you live in sort of this world of you're within the component lifetime because click's not going to fire unless you actually clicked on a thing that's on the page and actually rendered. And then within this click handler, you kind of set up this save call. But then by the time this callback happens, it clearly lives in a different lifetime than where it originally came from. And it's a very common source of errors. So basically, if you try to do anything that lives in a component, you've got to put in all sorts of guards, all sorts of if statements, all sorts of defensive programming to make sure to sort of reconstruct those boundaries that are lost by the fact that any of this async stuff doesn't actually live, this little blue box here isn't shifted over to the left and still live in sort of this lifetime. So, I mean, this isn't just Ember. I mean, I'm going to pick on Ember a lot because I know it the most, and this is a solution. This is an add-on, an Ember add-on. But what this looks like is an exception that says calling set on destroyed object in Emberland. In React, you might see something that says can only update a mounted or mounting component. I think Angular even like swallows the error, but that's not really much of a better solution either. So the sort of weak sauce fix to it, and that's only really part of a fix, is to put in something like this, put in some defensive programming, because Ember is going to do sort of a frameworky call you sort of thing by setting this is destroyed to true. So you can always check that, and yeah, that'll work, but it's not a happy situation if you've got to litter a bunch of if this is destroyed code all over your program, all over your Ember app, just because there's not really a good alternative to keeping all that async stuff boxed in. So that's very kludgy to have to do this.is destroyed. And if you got a lot of that, your app starts to look like this. So the problem is, it's really important for languages and frameworks to try to sort of provide and enforce these boundaries. And in this case, there's not really anything out there that I've ever seen, whether it's React, Ember, Angular, RxJS, any of these things that really do this for you. You've really got to provide those boundaries yourself. And when you can't rely on those boundaries, you have to write them on your own over and over again. So in other words, it's just a lot of boilerplate. And you're very, very likely to get it wrong. So the very real symptoms that'll show up in an Ember-specific context is, well, like I showed, you're checking if this is destroyed a lot. Or you're writing clear timeout or ember.run.cancel, perhaps within a lifecycle hook like will destroy or will destroy element. Which is, that's like the way you're supposed to do these things. That's like the idiomatic way of cleaning up after yourself. Or if you're writing a chain of promises and at some point, the component gets unrendered, you want to have some logic that says, should I keep on going? Has the component been unrendered at this point? So if you find yourself writing if should I keep going kind of logic, this is the same sort of problem where you're basically trying to rewrite those boundaries that unfortunately aren't provided by the language or framework that you're using. Another one is basically writing lots of guards to make sure that some async operation that you might have kicked off before doesn't start running while it's already running. In other words, you want to keep it from running concurrently. So what if, in this case, going back to the previous example, what if the user clicks save while it's already saving? Well, we've already got this if this is destroyed check, so we've kind of piecemeal put together that boundary for when the component gets unrendered because the user navigated away. But what if the user clicks save while it's already saving? You've got a few different options to you, all of which suck. And one of them is to put something in handlebars such that if it's saving, maybe don't display the button that would have caused this problem to happen. Or add some guards to your JavaScript code to basically be like, if I am already running, return early and don't run all this, don't run this operation. Either way, this also implies that you have some other state that you've tracked yourself, or maybe if you're lucky, the model exposes something like is loading or is saving. But either way, it's both of these sort of boilerplatey things depend on that other piece of state working, and often you have to write this sort of thing yourself. So obviously, this is a lot of whack-a-mole. That's me. That's a little kid. It's a real GIF taken from late 1980s. It's me freaking out watching you guys write your Ember apps. In other words, whack-a-mole or whack-a-hamster. So what we really want is structured concurrency, which are simple rules and constraints for asynchronous life cycles. And any sort of child life cycle, some subroutine lifespan should never outlive its parent lifespan, because that's where all the problems happen, because you lose those assumptions when a callback gets run. And then ideally, minimal or no boilerplate for just everyday async tasks that you might put into your Ember app. So one of the corollaries of this is that we really need something that supports cancellation. Because how can you basically prevent one life cycle from leaking outside of its parent life cycle if you can't sort of taper that subroutine life cycle? If you can't cancel it, you can't box it in any way. So promises, which in its current state, and there are definitely people starting to talk about approaches to cancellation with promises, but in their current state, they are not cancelable, and no one's really, until we have a specification for that, we can't really rely on that. So in the meantime, we kind of need something else, and hopefully something that actually already, by default, integrates really nicely with promises. So enter Ember concurrency, which is what all this is about. Like I said before, Ember concurrency gives you the primitive of a task, which again, tasks are these restartable, cancelable, asynchronous operations. And here's what it looks like to implement a task. Basically, you have to import task from Ember concurrency like you would any kind of add-on. And then you say that this Ember component has a task called myTask, and you say it's task, this should seem a little bit like writing a computed property. Instead of writing compute and giving it a function, you're saying task, and you're giving it a slightly different kind of function, which is a generator function. And generator functions are standardized as of ES 2015. You can use them in your Ember apps because they're going to be transpiled by Babel in a library called regenerator. And what they allow you to do is use this keyword called yield. And on its own, this is a very sort of unconventional use of generator functions, but they actually do everything that Ember concurrency needs to be awesome. So basically, the rule is, if you're writing a task, you're using this function star generator function syntax, and then any place that you yield, if the thing that you're yielding is a promise, it's going to pause at that place in the function, and then when that promise resolves, it'll resume where you left off. So what this task does, if I perform it, is to start off at 1 and count 2, 3, with 1,000 milliseconds or 1 second in between each one of them. And you're expressing it in this very synchronous seeming style, but really it's just, there's no callback. So it's really nice because it sort of gets rid of the kind of callback hell or heck, if you will, that comes with implementing things using promises. And as far like the template side of things is kind of boring. Instead of using the action helper, you use perform and you give it a task. And if you want to cancel that task, let's cancel it at 2. I know it's not showing the clicks, but I cancel it when it clicked to 2, and you'll notice that it doesn't go any further to 3. So that kind of is given to you up front. That would be really surprisingly annoyingly hard to do if you were using promises. And if it wasn't clear, timeout is just a helper that comes with Ember concurrency that returns a promise that resolves after whatever number of milliseconds that you pass into it. So that's your bare bones introduction to a task. And sort of just from this alone, you can know that tasks are performed. To call a task or make it run, you perform a task. Tasks are cancelable. You implement tasks with generator functions, and you pause at any point in the task by yielding a promise. What about loops? Last time this was just 5 lines of code in a row. Was something like a loop work? And it turns out they work just fine. This is does the exact same thing, but basically rolls all that logic up into a loop, and you're looping over an array of words rather than just yielding them in code one at a time. And nothing changes on the right side. Nothing changes in the template to make that work. Pretty cool stuff. So another thing to note is that all of these slides, this whole presentation, the slideshow, is basically an Ember app where every slide is a component. And all of them have these live code examples in them, and all of them have sort of async stuff going on and timers being set. But none of them use will destroy element, will destroy, or any sort of lifecycle hooks because they use tasks. And switching between these components is safe because tasks are automatically canceled when their host object is destroyed. So if I go to a different slide, I don't have to think about all the things that I need to cancel that might have been spun up while the task was alive. Ember concurrency is going to make sure that that boundary is basically curtailed at the point that the parent lifecycle, the lifetime of the component, is cut short. So you get automatic cancellation for free. And that does quite a lot for you, but there's still more to show. Another thing that's nice about tasks is that they know when they're running and they expose some useful state that you end up usually having to write yourself if you don't have tasks available to you. So 2 of the properties are isIdle and isRunning, which are the opposite of each other. And you can see that you can use them to stylize things like buttons and display loading spinners and make the cancel button show up as clickable when the task is running. This is just like you have to use this all the time in your app, in whatever app you're writing. I mean, what was interesting about presenting some of these ideas to some people at first is they're just like, sounds cool, sounds kind of academic, but I just don't really ever see myself using it. It's just like, no, it's everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere. It's kind of ridiculous how much it shows up in your apps. So here's a list of things that suck, or at least maybe no longer suck, now that you've got a task primitive. One is cleaning up after yourself via lifecycle hooks. You just don't have to write them anymore. If you've expressed things as a task, it'll get canceled when that parent object, usually a component, gets destroyed or unrendered. So there's no more callback heck either, and I'm calling it heck not because I give a shit about cussing during formal presentations, but because promise callbacks are admittedly less hellish than the alternative, because at least they give you nice sort of async try-catch semantics. But it's still putting a lot of logic and functions inside functions, and ES6 arrow syntax improves upon that, but it's still be nicer if you could write things in a more straightforward way. And for what it's worth, that's also why async await is going to be a thing in the next specification of JavaScript, which is very similar to what I was showing you with these generator functions and calling yield, but kind of more baked in to JavaScript as a language. And you no longer have to roll your own cancellation scheme, which usually if you need something to be canceled, you got to sort of ask yourself up front, it's like, ah, man, can I even use a promise here? What is a cancellation? Is it like is it an exception that throws and I have to conditionally catch it? I don't know. You don't have to worry about that. You don't have to manually set and then unset in like a finally hook or finally callback of a promise, some concept of is running, is loading, is processing, or any of these things, just so you can expose that a state should be unclickable while some task is running. You don't have to do that anymore because it's built into a task. You don't have to do all sorts of defensive programming about checking this is destroyed because a task is never going to resume if this is destroyed. So that's all well and good, but there's actually one really important use case that hasn't really been addressed so far, and that is, how do you prevent a task from running when it's already running? How do you prevent concurrency? So if I tap this, it's going to run the task, but if I keep on tapping it, it's going to start doing some weird stuff. You see kind of 1, 2, and 3 all twitch between each other because they're all running at the same time. And most of the time, you don't want that. Sometimes you do. And the default is to let you do that. The default is to basically have unbounded concurrency for a task. So that should honestly feel about the same as maybe running a promise or calling something that returns a promise within an action handler. And by default, there's nothing to stop you from running that action many different times. But that is the default that Ember concurrency gives you, but fortunately it gives you a way to gives you an alternative to that. So as I said, tasks have unbounded concurrency by default, so you can run multiple instances of a task at the same time, which is the sort of familiar default, sort of least surprising behavior. And if you want something to run one at a time, if you were to sort of write this yourself, or if you use something else to facilitate it, there's really only 3 different ways I can think of that 99% of the time are the way that you kind of make sure that only one task is running at a time. And the first option is to basically check if it's already running, and if it's already running, based on some state that you've set, or maybe if you're lucky, it comes along with some model or object that you're interacting with. Check if it's already running, and if it is, then return early. Otherwise, set is running to true, do the async thing, then in a finally hook, whether it succeeded or failed, set it back to false, so that next time you click it, it actually will run. That's one way of making sure that something runs one at a time. The second option is to chain onto a previous promise. So you only want one running at a time, but if someone clicks that button again, you want to sort of make it happen once the first run has completed. And this is actually a really, this is pretty elegant. I got this off of Robert Jackson, this whole technique of pass this.promise, which might be null at first, to rsvp.resolve, it turns it into a promise, and then call .then on it. So this is the sort of way of constructing a chain of promises in a really sneaky way. And what that facilitates is running things one at a time in a row. The third option is to restart an operation. And restarting means to cancel an old promise that was already running, cancel an old option that was already running, and then start the new one, thus also guaranteeing that only one thing is running at a time. But of course, this.promise.cancel is not a thing. Till the promise specifications specify that there is a way to cancel, and this is the way to do it, that's not an option for you. So this isn't even really a real solution. Basically, if you want to have cancellation, like I said before, you probably got to roll your own cancellation scheme and maybe find a way to sneak around promises or bolt them on in some weird way. So problems with these approaches, even if there's more problems than I already was talking about. So they're boilerplate. There's just something that you have to do every time. If you're going to, a client asks you to add this button that does this, or save this progress, or do whatever, you're like, oh, well, I can't just click save. I got to teach the whole template how to not, fire this task multiple times in a row. It's going to suck. Sounds easy, but it's hard. So they're boilerplate, and it's just all over in everyone's app, whatever kind of app you're trying to do. Again, React, Angular, Ember, they're all the same. So they all also require some promise acrobatics. There's not one way of doing all these different things. You got to be like, I'll know the trick with Ember, RSVP.resolve, possibly null, promise, then. It's like all these tricky little things that you have to learn to do, and you pat yourself on the back because you feel smart when you do them, but it's still a bunch of crap that you have to know. So another problem is that if you ever need to switch between these approaches, so for instance, I guess the most common case is you might not know up front whether clicking a button should cancel a previous task and start a new one, or enqueue them, or maybe ignore them while it's running. If you want to switch between any of those approaches, you can't just change one thing about them. You've kind of got to restructure the function that kicks off some async task, which is kind of a lack of portability, lack of composability, lack of flexibility. And again, this is stuff that's just like the bread and butter of every app that has some async into it. So if only there were a composable, reusable, elegant, non-boilerplate, all-purpose solution to this problem. And that solution is task modifiers. That's the solution. So what's a task modifier? Well, there's three, at least that I'm going to present in this presentation, and they're your new best friends. One of them is called .drop, one of them is called .enqueue, and one of them is called .restartable. So the next few slides are going to sort of go over a sort of visual graph of what these things look like when they're used. But I want to sort of start off with the control, which is what does a lifetime of a task look like when you visualize it without applying any sort of task modifiers. So if I tap this a bunch of times, you get some pretty graphs about these tasks lifetimes overlapping with each other. They all run to completion, and there's no concurrency constraints. So there's nothing keeping these things from running all at the same time. So again, that's the default behavior. If you want to tell Ember concurrency to run stuff one at a time, you've got to use a task modifier. So that's sort of the graph that we're going to be using for the next few examples. So the first one, and these all sort of correspond to the three examples for making sure something runs one at a time that I was showing before, is .drop. And it's literally taking the same task, which runs, this wait a moment generator function just does like literally yield timeout 2000, so wait 2 seconds and then just complete. So if you use drop, what this is going to do is it's going to let you perform the first task, but if you do a bunch of performs while it's already running, it's going to ignore those, and well, in Ember concurrency terminology, it's going to drop those. It's not going to cancel them, it's just not even going to run them. So you'll notice this never overlaps with any other task. It's literally running one thing at a time. The next option you have for making sure something runs one at a time is to enqueue. If you run a bunch of these, I don't know why it keeps on doing that. If you run a bunch of these, it's going to run them in sequence, one at a time. And this is your alternative, again, to building your own sort of uncancelable promise chain using some promise acrobatics. Just literally change what used to be .drop to .enqueue. Your third option is to say that this task is restartable. And a restartable task, if it's already running, means it's going to cancel the first instance of the task that might already be running. So if you do a bunch of these in a row, you'll see that all these things that are running by the time that I perform another task are going to get canceled. So this is pretty nice, because literally there's only one thing that you need to change to completely switch how you enforce that something runs one at a time. So as a counterpoint to the list of things that suck that you no longer have to worry about, here's a list of like sort of added benefits that never even really used to exist. Well, one is that there's zero boilerplate for using this stuff. It's literally only the thing that the task does that you have to implement, plus whatever task modifier you want to apply to it. There's zero cost to switch between these modifiers. You don't have to rewrite a function to say, oh, this is going to be the kind of function that drops or ignores attempts to perform it when it's already running. You can just switch it to say, oh, I actually want all these things to run just one at a time. So I'll switch it to enqueue. There's no cost to doing that. And it's flexible. So if there's some use case that Ember concurrency doesn't cover with these primitives, you can always just fall back and say, like, okay, it's time for this task to cancel. This.get name of the task, and then cancel it. And so that's sort of like the most important 95th percentile of the Ember concurrency API. And I just want to go through some examples. Things that are usually really hard to do that are actually really easy now. And the first example is some buttons that start incrementing slowly, but then gain speed, whether you're decrementing or incrementing. And I guess I should probably start with what the actual template looks like. It makes use of a component that I don't actually show in the code because it's not super important, but it's a component called press and hold button, which you have to give it two actions, one that fires when you press the button and one that fires when you release it. And just like the action helper, you can use it sort of in this closure-y form. You can say, when you press it, perform the increment task by passing a value of -1, and when you release or the mouse goes outside of the border of the button, it's increment by 0. And you'll see how that works. And we do -1 for the decrement and +1 for the increase, increment. And so what this task actually looks like, and this is a task, literally, this is code using these snippets basically come from an Ember add-on called Ember Code Snippet that Edward Faulkner did. So these aren't dressed up in any ways. You can actually find the source code for these slides, and it's literally these lines of code, because that's all this slide is this component here. So you start off with a number of 0 when this slide is rendered. Oops. So that's why it's 0. And then you have this increment task by, and as always, you use the generator function syntax, so you can use the yield keyword. And the first thing you say is, if increment is 0, this is not the same kind of is destroyed guards. You'll see how this works in just a moment. But if increment is 0 or falsy in some way, then just return early. Otherwise, we start off at a speed of 400 milliseconds, and we literally do this while true, go on forever loop. Because you're allowed to do this stuff when something in the future is going to cancel this task. So again, this is the structured concurrency I was kind of talking about before. This is all the things that happen in this line of code. I don't have to have some piece of code elsewhere, have to know that it's inside here to know to check for some timer that's been set, to know to cancel it, and some life cycle hook. Just make this task be concerned with this and just know that it'll be canceled at some point. So what does this while loop do? It just takes the number, it increments either by +1 or decrements by -1 if this is the action being fired. And then you pause here for a certain number of milliseconds, which starts off at 400, but at the end of every loop, you cut it down a little bit by 80% and make sure that it never goes any faster than 50 milliseconds. This is like astonishingly concise and still pretty clear if you've ever had to write a component that actually does this work without using these primitives, when you have to cancel things yourself, when you have to write these lifecycle hooks to stop any sort of async action and clean up after yourself. Sure. Question from Luke.
So why do this kind of increment by 0 thing as opposed to canceling the task in a situation like this?
That's a good question. Let's just try changing the code.
Sweet.
Accelerator example. Code. We'll get rid of this guy.
Make it a little bigger.
Oh, sure. Let me get rid of this nonsense. I'm going to, I'm so bad at Vim in front of people. Slide accelerator, example template. So I think it should actually work. I'll talk about later why it's called cancel all versus cancel. Cancel all, increment by. This should work just fine. Let's see. Nice. Good call, Luke. I guess the only reason I might do it the other way is that if there's going to be other things that come along and might say, like, wrestle control away from these buttons that kicked off the task, like some other button that I didn't plan on, then that would all be magically cleaned up by nature of you saying that this is a restartable task. So something else comes along and doesn't explicitly cancel, at least you've got that baked into the task to be smart enough to do that. But that was a great suggestion, and I'm glad that worked. So next example, which is a two-parter. I got really interested in observables and RxJS a year ago, and I think I even made a presentation about it, which was a little on the embarrassing side because I didn't really stick with it. I think I'll actually stick with this one. So debounced autocomplete. So for instance, this is integrating with an add-on that's pretty popular these days called Ember Power Select. And Ember Power Select gives you lots of, using really idiomatic Ember and kind of closure helpers and all these other nice things that are pretty new and recent ideas. It gives you a drop-down that can do things like live update in response to user typing stuff and making AJAX queries. But when it comes to, if you actually want to make a production auto search while you type, you have to do some things to make sure you're not overloading either your browser or the server. So for one, you don't want literally every time that you press a key to kick off an AJAX request, because chances are the user's going to keep on typing. If they type a 6-letter word, you just kicked off 6 AJAX requests. So you got to debounce it, which is just a sort of way of saying, on the first event, wait a certain amount of time, which that timer might be restarted if another event happens in that time, but only sort of kick off some action when a certain amount of time has elapsed from the last event. That's what debouncing means. And it turns out there's actually ember.run.debounce is API that comes built into Ember. And if you look at this example from Ember Power Select, which is where I sort of lifted the example from and wanted to do a better job, you can actually see them using run.debounce, but the way they do it is very tricky, because this action is called every time that you type a new letter into Ember Power Select, and you're giving it a promise that won't resolve immediately, but will only resolve because you're cleverly passing resolve and reject to this little helper function, passing a value of 600 for it to actually debounce. And it was really tricky. I had to look at this thing and just just really sit and think about how this worked. And when it finally did click, it wasn't the sort of I'm like so much smarter. I'm just like, that works, but kind of sucks too. So, I use that use case to sort of drive making this API nice. I don't mean to disparage the the creator of this add-on. I think we were both kind of in agreement. So this improves upon that, and it does literally the same things, makes the same AJAX request against a GitHub URL. And the way it works is, as always, this Ember Power Select is going to run this action every time that a user types a letter. And if your database is something that's already in the app, it's synchronously available, it's already there, then maybe you could just return it right away. But since this is going to be AJAX and it's going to use resources to make that AJAX call, you want to debounce it. And the Ember concurrency way of doing that is not to use things like ember.run.debounce, which have their own sort of weird API warts and things that are a little strange about it, such as the fact that you could, what does it mean to call ember.run.debounce with one set of milliseconds one time and then a different set of milliseconds the next time? I don't know, you just kind of hope it doesn't happen. But so this is how this works. Ember Power Select is going to call this task, because we're passing it perform search repo, the name of this task. If it's blank, then we can just return an empty array. It's fine. You don't want to waste any resources querying nothing. And then what this does is this yields this timeout promise, which is going to wait 250 milliseconds, and it's going to wait for that period of time to elapse before it actually does any sort of AJAX request. And then at the end of it, if that manages to get to this point, what that means is that the user has not continued typing. Because if the user did continue typing, this task would be called again, and because it's restartable, which is one of those task modifiers that makes sure that something runs only one at a time, that would have kicked in and canceled that pre-existing already running task. So if it gets to this point, you know that 250 milliseconds has elapsed. You yield $getJSON, which is a promise, or at least it's promisey enough for Ember and Ember concurrency to recognize it. And then when that promise resolves, when the AJAX query actually comes all the way back, we want to just pull a value off of it. Well, I guess the thing to show here, which I didn't talk about before, is that if you yield a promise, the resolve value is what ends up getting stored in this variable when it comes back. So we just need to return this blob of JSON.items, and that's what returns the items array to sort of make this show up. And what's cool about all of this is that if you were to open the inspector, you'd see that as you're typing stuff in, it's only when you sort of let go or stop typing that it actually kicks off a request. So I said before that this is a sort of two-parter example, because there's one more thing that we could do to sort of spruce this up. So this is the XHR canceling debounce autocomplete example. Before it was just the debounce autocomplete example. The difference here is that if you start a new AJAX request, or you start typing, to be very specific, while a pre-existing AJAX request is already pending, is already underway, then it would actually be pretty ideal to cancel that and make sure you're not still consuming resources for an AJAX request that you don't care about the response to anymore. And so how do you do that? So the only lines of code that changed are this changed from $getJSON, this changed into the syntax for performing a task from within JavaScript, which is to get the task and call perform on it, pass it a URL. And what's different about this, and this is admittedly more on the advanced side of things, is that because we've expressed this AJAX operation via a task, we get to use the try finally construct. And so what happens is that when you perform this task, it's going to get the it's going to get the JSON as it did before. It's not going to yield it right away, but it is going to store that XHR request into a variable, which is available throughout this entire function. Then it yields a promise. And then if the user starts typing again, if you cancel a task, it's going to run all of its finally blocks, just like it would if it were, exiting under some other error or even normal circumstances. So what this means is that if the user keeps on typing and this task gets canceled by nature of being called again, it's going to cancel any of its child tasks, such as this.perform, and it's going to hit this line of code that says xhr.abort, which does nothing if it already returned, and then cancels the AJAX request if it's actually still pending. So you can actually see this in action if I start typing while AJAX is underway. You see all these things on the right, show up as canceled before the last one, which I didn't interrupt, actually goes through. That's pretty cool. Try and do that with a promise. So there's some other examples that I'm not going to really go into. They're more involved, but they're still very elegant. And some of these examples are stuff I came up with on my own for use cases, and some of these are examples that people who have started, very early adopters of Ember concurrency, have told me, like, whoa, I didn't realize they could use it for this, and this is just a short list of those. One is that you can throttle any sort of event stream, such as WebSockets. So if you get a burst of messages at once, but your UI kind of depends on you processing them one at a time, or maybe dropping messages if you know they're not super important, well, you can just use a task modifier and say how you want to handle all those and prevent them from being handled all at the same time, but sort of enqueue them or drop them or restart some logic. You can use it for resource management, and this works because there's actually another task modifier that says instead of just constraining the max concurrency to just one in the case of drop and queue or restartable, you can actually say constrain it to a maximum of 3. So don't start dropping things until there's more than 3 things running at the same time. And that's more advanced of a use case, but it makes it really easy to sort of say, here's a shared resource. I don't want any more than 3 AJAX requests being made at the same time. So you can put that AJAX request in a task and say, give it a max concurrency of 3. And then there's other examples that don't even sound like they really have to do with concurrency, but they really do. And they're made much easier and more easy to express with tasks. And just one example is if you have any sort of tooltip that maybe appears after you've hovered on a link for a little bit, or you've got sort of menu drop-downs that you don't want to immediately just flashing in your face just because you lightly flicked that word with a hover event, you can debounce that stuff, and you can do things like if you already have one open, then don't close it until you've hovered away for more than this amount of time. But if you've hovered away onto another event, then make it happen more immediately. There's all these little use cases that are just ridiculously easy to get right. Another example of using Ember concurrency is if you want to have some operation that's really important to succeed, or your whole app sort of depends on it, you can loop until the operation succeeds, and then you can say, give it some exponential backoff. So for instance, if it's GChat or Slack, if you lose a connection, it's going to say, oh, lost a connection, try again in 2 seconds. Still don't have a connection. I'm going to try again in 10 seconds. Okay, it's really bad. It's going to be 2 minutes next time. And the whole point of that is to say if it's the server that has the problem and not something between you and the server, you're not going to overload the server with a bunch of requests while it's already trying to recover. And that's just something that's super easy to do when you can visualize things into a loop. It's really just like the same example of the accelerating, incrementing, and decrementing buttons, but maybe like sort of inverted. And there's some other API that comes along with Ember concurrency that you might be interested in looking at, which is on the Ember concurrency site, if you want to take a look. And like I said before, there's another task modifier that you can use that can say, let more than one thing happen at the same time, but like limit it to 3 or 5 or 10 or whatever. There is a variant of promise.all and promise.race, which these are used in promise land as, you pass it an array of promises, and promise.all will wait for them to all resolve, or the first one to fail before it resolve or rejects. And promise.race will basically you send an array of promises, and the first one that succeeds or rejects is the one that kind of wins. And there's a nice sort of task-aware variant of this that's supplied where, in the case of promise.race, if the first one resolves, or it's a task that you pass it, a task that you pass it, then all the other tasks that you passed will be canceled. And it's pretty nice to have in some cases where it's like, I'm going to fire off 2 events, and the first one's going to win, but the other one should clean up after itself when it gets canceled because the other one won. And I don't really talk about it in this talk at all, but all these things like task modifiers are great because they apply to a single task and keep a task from running concurrently. But if you need to prevent 2 different tasks from running at the same time, there are also facilities for that. Then you can integrate with other kind of async schemes like observables and all these other things. Just check out the website. So in summary, in closing, the things that used to suck before Ember concurrency came along was this sort of cleaning up of yourself if you introduce any sort of async in things like components or any sort of object that might be destroyed at some point. The callback heck associated with passing callbacks to promise.then, which again, this is the same benefit as using async await, but async await in its present form is not cancelable. You don't have to write your own homegrown cancellation schemes and then have to make this decision, crap, can I even use promises here? No, it's to cancel, maybe not. You don't have to set and unset some sort of like bool flag of like, am I running? Okay, at the end of it, I'm no longer running. And then, have to use that logic yourself in the boilerplate of, making sure that only one thing is running at a time. And you don't have to have any sort of checking that this.is destroyed logic, that sort of defensive async programming that you used to have to do. And the things that rock are that there's no boilerplate to using this stuff. Concurrency is treated as a first-class citizen and not just something you gotta like sweep under the rug after you've written the code that actually does the thing. And switching between concurrency strategies is effortless. If a button that used to ignore attempts to perform it again needs to be switched to something that should, run them in sequence or cancel the first task, that's just, just one little substitution away rather than rewriting your function. And all of this, in my opinion, still manages to feel like an Ember API. This honestly should feel like computed properties, but somehow async. So it's dangerous to go along. Import Ember tasks from Ember concurrency. And I hope you give it a try and let me know how it goes. That's it.
Awesome. Cool. Well, before I open the floor to questions, I just want to say thank you for coming back and doing this because I was among the group, the crowd of people that saw the last talk, and I was like, yeah, it seems sort of interesting. And now I'm like, holy shit. This is awesome. This is like will clean up so many code and probably bugs. Let me go open up the floor to questions. I have some of my own, but let's start with Hassan.
Wow, holy shit. So I want to tomorrow go and turn every promise into a yield now. Are there anything that you have to make that easier? Like, are there ways of wrapping Ember data models so they only return promises, or like a Bluebird promisify all, only a taskify all that can wrap all the things that are promises and tasks?
You could, if you had a model that was, this is all just going to be pseudocode. Extend, save is something that's built into the model, so you're not going to override that. I wouldn't recommend it, but I don't know. I mean, think of a better name. I'm not going to sort of bike shed on stage. But you could say, this is going to be a task. What does it do? It yields this dot save. And actually, I forget if you kind of have to yield it and then return it. And then that's not the worst thing in the world. There's your little smidgen of boilerplate. I lied. It's all a lie. There's some boilerplate. But you could say that for this model, which is always going to be, every time you say find some object ID 123, it's always going to return the same model because it's in the store. If you've declared a task on that model and you wanted to say that I only want one of these to run at a certain time, then I think that's literally all that you have to write. And then this will just make sure that if someone else calls save task.perform, it's going to see that it's already running and drop that second attempt and give you a rejected promise. So that's one way. It's really easy to kind of wrap pre-existing things in tasks. And maybe if you find yourself doing this sort of thing a lot, just to taskify a bunch of promise returning functions, there might even be like a shorter way, something that could come with Ember concurrency that said something like save taskify or something, and that'll be smart enough to like extend the parent class object but make it tasky in some way. I don't know if you want to do that, but it's something to think about.
Before I go to the next questioner, is there, I can understand Hassan's sentiment of wanting to go back to his code base and
Oh
put this
yeah,
in
sorry.
everywhere. Is there any reason not to do that?
Absolutely. So let me just say all the quick reasons why Ember concurrency may or may not suck. One is that I've only felt really confident where things landed maybe for like 2 weeks. And that's not a lot of time in open source land, so there could just be some bugs that I wasn't thinking of. I mean, the test suite is already pretty good, so there might just be something broken in Ember concurrency because it hasn't been battle tested yet. There's a few early adopters. But as always, it's a new, shiny thing unless you succumb to JavaScript fatigue with yet another thing, even though I think there's a particularly good one. Always take all this new stuff with a grain of salt. The other thing to realize is that if you're using this function star syntax, or you're using async await for what it's worth, it needs to be transpiled so it'll actually run in today's browsers or yesterday's browsers. And what that transpilation output looks like, it kind of takes this, which looks like a nice little linear function, and kind of splices it into a state machine, and you basically see this replaced with something that says regenerator runtime, and then like a big switch statement, because ultimately that's what a generator function does, is lets you write something like this, but in a way that kind of keeps track of what point it's at. So it's got to be a state machine, and it makes it a little awkward to debug, but still, in my opinion, leaves enough fragments of recognizable code that you can still set debuggers and check values and all this other stuff. So that's something to keep in mind. Performance-wise, it shouldn't really make a difference. It doesn't really do anything outlandishly expensive or gross.
Other questions?
Okay. First, before I ask my crazy question, I have to say, I owe you a beer. See me tonight.
I will take it.
All right. Yeah, this is a Robert Jackson-like moment. So.
What's the Robert Jackson moment?
I owe you a beer.
Oh yeah, I had the pleasure of having Robert Jackson. I did a presentation on this like 2 weeks ago. It was even still like not super fleshed out. It was just me going over the website, and Robert was just in the audience, and he had a list of things to ask me, and then by the end it was like, oh, I don't know, it's pretty cool. So
Okay,
Robert owes me a beer now.
Some API gives you a non-cancelable promise. How in this generator are you canceling it?
How am I canceling it? Well, so to go back to this example here, the first version of this, again, the enhancement that was made between debounce autocomplete and XHR canceling autocomplete is that if you are paused at this point in this function, in the first example that doesn't use a task to express the get JSON, if you're paused at this point and then a user starts typing again, that'll cancel the task, but this on its own doesn't really correspond to any sort of cancellation API, so it'll keep going, but whatever it returns or rejects is going to be ignored because the task has already moved on to the next running instance. So there's not really anything you can do to just magically make it cancelable. I just showed you, if you want to go through the ropes of taskifying something that does give you some way of canceling the underlying event in the way that jQuery does, because it returns an XHR, and the XHR has a .then method, so you can use it in place of a promise, but the object itself has an abort method on it that you can call and use it for cancellation. That's how you can sort of make something that's got some concept of cancellation actually cancelable but still feel promisey.
So if I was trying to cancel a route transition or a save, if I was trying to cancel a route transition or a save method, it wouldn't actually cancel.
Right, something like a model hook and a route. Right now, there's nothing in Ember land that would say, if you're a thing that can cancel yourself. It's just promise aware. But if this catches on, that might change.
Can I ask you a couple of questions about this slide? Just want to check understanding. Is it a good way to think about it that when this task is canceled, the kind of check for cancellation happens like when a yield is about to return? Is that a way to think about it?
A good way to think about it is that you could not somehow cancel at this line It is only, you're slicing your function into a bunch of yields, basically. And every slice of runnable code between those yields is basically atomic. You can't cancel anything in between that. It doesn't really make sense. You've got to sort of yield or give up control to the thing that's running this generator function before it can actually discontinue from running.
Got it. Cool. So that was one of them. The second thing is when we talk about a cancelable task, I see we've got this try finally syntax. Is there a sort of catch idea in here too? Like, is there an exception that's triggered inside of the state machine that's going to result in this kind of moving to this finally immediately, and/or running a catch block if you had one here?
Right now, a catch is a cancellation is a kind of promise rejection that in this sort of try-catch land will throw. And if you tried to catch a cancellation and then continue doing async things, I don't know the state of things right now. It's kind of undefined behavior, but ideally you should not continue trying to do stuff if you've been canceled. And the only way I can imagine supporting that is if there was some way of propagating that message upward, that there's child tasks that still need a little bit of time. And that's not really a concept in Ember. Like if you try to transition away from a route, you can imagine some future API supporting like, oh, there's a task running that isn't immediately canceling, let it finish up whatever thing it's doing, close the connection or whatever.
Right.
But that
Like
doesn't exist.
Kill versus kill-9.
Exactly. Yeah, and there's actually another, someone recently wrote a blog post on structured concurrency in like, for C programming language and some similar patterns, and giving grace periods for things that are being canceled, but that doesn't really apply here because nothing in Ember, like route transitions, knows how to give things grace periods. It's like having an if block in a template. It's either rendered or it's not, and so there's only so much you can do. So for now, delaying cancellation with a try catch isn't really
I
defined.
was thinking more actually the use case I was imagining is knowing whether we were canceled or whether we finished. Right? Because I assume this would always run.
Oh,
this finally
then
block.
I guess what you could do is what is this? Autocomplete example 2. No, that's not the one. Example 2 component. Right, so if you wanted to know whether it completed or not, I mean, you could just do did complete equals false, and if you get here, you say did complete equals true.
Gotcha.
And I guess you'd need to just save some stuff and then eventually return this. It works. There's probably some patterns that remain to be fleshed out and cleaned up a bit, but this will definitely work out of the box. And then you can use this information to decide what this finally block means, whether it's a cancellation or
Cool.
something failed about the exception
Got
or
it.
something else.
Other questions for Alex?
Just out of curiosity, why is it cancel all and not cancel for canceling a task?
Oh, because by default, a task can run multiple instances of itself at the same time. That's the default. So if you say task.cancel, which one are you canceling? I just want to make it clear from the API that this has a potential to cancel lots of things at the same time.
Who else had their?
Alex, this is amazing. It's really cool. I think my question's different to yours, Luke, but similar. So we were talking a little about skeleton UI when I spoke to you last week or last month. And I'm kind of seeing a bit of a pattern that you could potentially do with like before model hook, start a task in a route, and potentially use it to kind of populate what that route looks like after the transition is complete.
Yeah.
And potentially cancel that if the route deactivates. But what I don't quite grok yet is in a place where you're yielding a promise, what happens if that promise is rejected? That's a canceled task?
It behaves the same as async await will work. So if you were here and this, you hit the server cuts out or whatever, this promise would reject. And what that means for this sort of running generator function is that it would throw from this point. So it would hit this finally block and abort an XHR that's already failed, but continue to sort of kind of propagate upward. It would throw from here because this is the thing that called it. And right now I don't have any sort of API exposed to like handle a task that failed in any way, but whoever initiated that task could respond to that.
Right. Okay.
All the promise semantics are preserved, just with the added benefit that it's possible to cancel a task.
Cool. Thank you.
Who else? I'll go one more then. When we talk about in the template, we had examples of in my task dot is running.
Yep.
I assume that's like one or more are running. Is that the idea?
Yeah.
Okay. And then if you call, so you're sort of always talking about a a collection of my task. When you say this dot get my task, we should like think about that as a collection with 0 or more things active in it or something.
Yeah, the actual API, which is on there's like some API docs, they call it a task, which is this dot get task returns a task object, and then the individual instances and what gets returned when you call this dot or task dot perform is a task instance. And
Okay.
I got some laughs from some of the people that also worked on the application instance API and engine instances. If anyone wants to help me bike shed some better API terms, I'm guessing the one thing about Ember concurrency is it probably has like one mass rename, a few months down once everyone's had some time to feel it out and see what these things should actually be called.
Cool. All right. Anything else before we go for drinks? Let's give a great round of applause for Alex.
Thanks.
All right, that is it for February 2016 Ember NYC. Thank you all for tuning in. Thanks for being here. We are heading to, what's the place called where we always go? Crooked Knife on 14th Street between 7th and 8th, south side of the street. Please come out and join us if you feel like it. Otherwise, we'll see you either on our March 9th project night or on March 24th for our next evening of talks. Thanks, everybody.